Governor, thank you so much. First, I want to thank you not only for your time today, but for your work and effort over the past few months. I can't imagine the personal stress and sacrifice that you've encountered during these really unprecedented times, so thank you. I do want to say you've committed to a review of Oregon police standards. Yesterday, Mayor Wheeler laid out the start of his plan. It includes cutting a gun crimes task force, transit police. No longer will we have armed officers in schools in Portland. What is your opinion on that phrase, defunding the police, we've been hearing nationwide in our state and in our cities?
Well, I think we can all agree that the police brutality and the violence against protesters that's happening against African-American people, Black people in this country must end. And so I am absolutely committed to taking actions that ensure the safety of all of our communities. And so I think there are a couple of things that we need to look at first. Number one, the People of Color Caucus has a couple of legislative proposals. I look forward to signing those when we get into special session. Number two, as you are aware, the state trains all of the law enforcement community in this state. And I think we need to re-examine our training policies and our accountability measures. I have a team working on that right now. That's where we begin. Here's also what I do know. Actions need to be taken. Good intentions, words are not enough. We have to tackle the racial injustice in this state and this country. And I'm absolutely committed to taking that action and making it happen. We have to have an Oregon that is truly just and equal for all.
What about the concern that cutting crime units is going to cause a rise in violence? For instance, gun crimes in Portland are way up this year. Earlier this year, they were describing the numbers as unprecedented. The gun violence reduction team, they were nearly cut, you might remember, a few years ago by then Chief Danielle Outlaw. But she said it was vital to keeping crime down, primarily in marginalized neighborhoods. And Outlaw is a progressive chief, a woman of color. She left Portland for a larger department in America's 6th largest city in Philadelphia. So, was she wrong there? Is there a concern about cutting these units and seeing a rise in crime?
Look, what I hear Oregonians and Americans and frankly human beings across the world saying is that the violence against people of color, African American people, brown people needs to end. And I think one of the best investments that we can make is tackling the root causes of violence in our country and in our world. And that is by making sure that our families have the support and services that they need, that our kids have a comprehensive system of early childhood education, that we have good childcare, that we can nip the opportunity gaps in the bud, and we can make sure that our children have a seamless system of education, literally from cradle to career, and that every child can achieve his or her or theirs full potential. That's where I think we need to be focused, and we have limited resources and dollars. We need to make sure, and every Oregon taxpayer knows this, that we are getting the best bang for our taxpayer dollar, and we know that by focusing resources on early childhood education, on education for all of our kids, that we can have a safer and more peaceful Oregon, and a one where everyone can achieve their full potential.
So we've been closely watching the way the Portland police handle the protests that we've seen, especially once they turn violent. And there's this big discussion right now over the use of tear gas, or CS gas. There are several lawsuits revolving around the use of tear gas in Portland right now. There's a federal judge ruled that police can only use it when lives or safety of the public or the police are at risk. But that's certainly not really a yes or no ruling. I mean, who's to determine the exact moment when lives are at risk? So where do you stand on the use of tear gas by police in Oregon?
Well, in terms of using tear gas against protesters, I think it's unacceptable. But again, I think this goes back to training. And how can we make sure that our law enforcement have different tools and different resources to use so that we can keep our communities safe and make sure that when we have protests like this, folks can do so peacefully and continue to exercise their right of free speech.
So you believe that tear gas should not be used at all, regardless of the circumstance?
That is correct. So I think that you will see the legislature come in and discuss a number of these policies over the next couple of weeks. I think it's really important that we have the discussion. The harsh reality is that the vast majority of our law enforcement are good actors. You have obviously a few outliers. I want to applaud the efforts of Superintendent Travis Hampton, the Sheriff's Association, and the Police Association for immediately condemning what happened in the state of Minnesota. We all need to join in that condemnation and make sure that this level of violence, police brutality, doesn't happen in this state and in this country.
In an earlier news conference, you said that Mayor Wheeler asked you to deploy the National Guard, and you said that you don't want soldiers in the streets of Portland. And then you criticized President Trump's call for the National Guard troops to be sent to our cities as a scare tactic to intimidate Americans. That said, our police departments use military-grade equipment, armored vehicles, flashbang grenades, military-grade protective gear, assault rifles similar to the guns that Marines carry in war. Do you believe that we should disarm police from these military-grade levels of protection and weaponry?
Look, our systems of law enforcement have been built on racism. I think we need to look at how we train, how we recruit, how we bring in new officers. I think we need to look at new techniques. I think we need to look at new strategies. I know that there are models in other countries and in other communities. I think we need to re-envision how our law enforcement operates in this country. But we know it's been built on a system of racial oppression that needs to end.
That said, police are worried about their own safety. Do you think it's time to take that equipment from them, those armored vehicles, the grenade launchers, the assault rifles?
Look, what I'm really clear about is that we need to really examine how we train law enforcement in this state. I'm committed to doing that, and I am committed to rebuilding as we move into our reopening phase, a more just and equitable Oregon. I think it's critically important that we put the voices of the African American community, of the Black community, of the Latinx community, of our Indigenous community at the forefront of our recovery efforts. I'm committed to making that happen. I think we can work together, we can co-create, we can work collaboratively to build a better Oregon for everyone.
Again, I'm not really hearing an opinion on the weaponry, the military grade equipment that they use. Are you just not prepared to make a statement as definitive on that right now?
Look, I think it's really important that we change our training methods and the techniques and strategies that law enforcement use.
So we've seen great improvements as we kind of pivot now to COVID and another crisis that we're seeing right now in Oregon and across the country. We have seen great improvements in testing for COVID-19, but we are still considered to be kind of at the back of the pack compared to the rest of the country. You have secured a plan to have available tests for staff and residents in our nursing homes, which have been the hardest hit by this virus. All countries seem to have a trajectory, all counties rather, seem to have a trajectory now for opening more and more. We are still waiting to see what's going to happen with Multnomah County. They're the only county left waiting to see what's going to happen with phase one. But are you anxious as we see all of these protests and these marches and these people gather together that we're going to see a major spike in COVID cases and that it's going to cause an economic setback for Portland and the rest of the state?
Look, you raised about 3 issues in one question. I'll try and address a couple of them. Number one, am I concerned about the protests? I was concerned when Trump supporters showed up at the state capitol to protest my stay-at-home order. I was concerned when we saw thousands of protesters hit the streets, really suggesting a clarion call for justice and equity in this state, in this country. I want to make sure that protesters continue to use and exercise their First Amendment rights to free speech, but I want to encourage, cajole folks to be safe, to wear face coverings, to maintain 6 feet of distancing, to use hand sanitizer, cover your face when you need to cough or sneeze. In terms of our assisted living facilities, We have over 680 assisted living facilities in the state. We know that these are our most vulnerable Oregonians. And I took immediate and decisive action to limit visitation to these facilities. The Department of Human Services and the Oregon Health Authority have a strike team designed to make sure that we are keeping the appropriate level of infection control at these facilities across the state. And we are moving forward on a plan to test all of our assisted living facilities across the entire state. But the challenge is, for a state like Oregon, we did the right thing. We took decisive and early action to shutter our state. Oregonians made tremendous sacrifices to reduce the spread of COVID-19. And as a result, we've seen, compared to other states, relatively low rates of infection. Consequently, we are not getting the resources that we need from the federal government to increase our testing capacity. I just sent a letter off this week to say we need more assistance so we can fully test all of our assisted living facilities, our nursing homes across the state. These are some of our most vulnerable Oregonians, and they deserve to have this level of protection.
That said, the virus doesn't consider why people are gathering, what they're protesting, why they're together. Hundreds of thousands of people have been gathered in close quarters downtown for many, many days. Is there discussion in your office or with the health officials you're working with preparing for a major spike and what that might mean for the closures of various communities?
Again, I want to say I join in the protesters in Portland and Ontario and around the state who are issuing a clarion call for an end of racial discrimination and an end to the police brutality in this country. At the same time, as we are beginning the reopening process, we knew we were likely to see an increase in these COVID-19 cases. And I liken it to, you might have heard my metaphor. I grew up in Minnesota. We used to skate on the frozen ponds all the time. And as the ponds became frozen, we'd strap on our skates and we'd take one step forward. And then if it was safe, if it didn't crack, if you didn't fall in, you'd take another step. We're doing the same thing with the gradual reopening. My goal is to make sure that Oregonians across the state can remain safe and healthy, and that they can continue to get back to the business of running their businesses and helping the state economy. Governor, I have to run. It's great to see you. Take good care.
Governor, thank you so much for your time.